It can kind of help you orient yourself to where you are in the head if you completely lose your mind on test day. This little connection that you see leading from that posterior ganglia to kind of more of our brain tissue is just that trigeminal nerve, or cranial nerve number 5 right here, kind of branching off it. Just like Heather said, you can pretty well see more than in the 6 millimeter pig and the 10 millimeter pig. That truth about the ganglia being darker staining than the nerves kind of holds more true. So you can use that to help you ID these nerves versus ganglia. Alright, so hanging out by our lovely otic vesicles, closer to that mesencephalon tissue, we're going to have both the cranial nerve number 7 and number 8 kind of grouped together. This first portion right here, if we watch it as we go back, you can see it split better. And this first portion that's kind of almost touching that otic vesicle is going to be that vestibulo-acoustic ganglia. Easier to say, auditory ganglia, which makes sense since we're hanging out by the ear. And then that second portion, or number 7, is going to be that geniculate ganglia. So this is number 7, this is number 8.
So that first one wasn't the acoustico-facialis?
I think it has 2 different names you can call it. You can call it either acoustico-facialis. Your digital lab manual has it labeled right here as vestibulo-acoustic ganglia. Yeah. So I believe it has 2 different names. It should be on that chart though.
Right.
You have to lecture. Okay. So closer to our spinal cord region, sitting closest to that otic vesicle, is going to be cranial nerve number 9, or that glossopharyngeal nerve. Basically, it's going to be much smaller than in our 6 millimeter pig. It will have a distal and protrusal portion associated with it, but it's typically kind of hard to see. So I might know that more for like an accessory question. Kind of hard to point out those 2 different portions at this stage in development. And then next, number 9, of course, is number 10 right here, really darker staining. That's going to be your vagus nerve, and it will also have 2 kind of ganglia associated with it. And this first one's going to be like your jugular ganglia. You can see it really well, darkly staining here, next to cranial nerve number 10. And if you go farther back and we follow it, it's going to have a much lighter staining portion, maybe say like right here, and that's going to be that nodose portion. Let's see if I can get a better picture. Maybe like right there. Whenever you see those arches first appear, that'd be a good place to point out the nodose for number 10. And then something we haven't seen in our 6 millimeter pig is this other nerve right here. It's always going to hang out pretty close to number 10 in that myelencephalon spinal cord region. It's going to be very more interior in our organism. Keep this in mind because you'll see when we go over our slide for today that it can be confused for cranial nerve number 12. But number 11 is always going to look pretty even here. It's not going to be PC. And this is just the spinal accessory nerve. That's just what you would call it if you wanted to give a name for it. Alright. And then last thing, just kind of see on this slide, in terms of nerves, is cranial nerve number 3. And I don't even know if you guys can see it, but it's a very lightly staining nerve at this point. Remember, that's your ocular motor nerve, and it's always going to hang out around that diencephalon tissue. So if we go back further, at some point, you're going to see one last nerve kind of jut out of that brain tissue. It's going to be really lightly staining. This is going to be cranial nerve number 6, or the abductance nerve. Don't worry about cranial nerve number 4 in terms of finding it. Look have that little kind of protrusion or pocket coming off of it. And that, of course, is rat piece pouch pocket. So it's going to be near that infundibulum of that diencephalon. And then we can also see another kind of cutting into that pharynx or pharyngeal region. And so we know right here, probably that roof of our mouth in our pig. So it's going to be Cecil's pouch or Cecil's pocket, right next to rat piece pouch or pocket. Whatever you want to call it. At this point in your pig, the back of our tongue is actually going to be connected now with the copula. It's this tissue right here. So that tuberculum impar is now pretty much connected. It's not going to be floating out in the middle of our pharyngeal region. This may or may not be the case for your own slides. Just in the digital lab manual, this one's more developed.
What exactly is this?
It's just the root of the tongue.
So the two branches?
I'm not sure if they have names.
So is it still just called the copula?
Where would you point for the copula?
That's what I heard. And then I put right here for the feeling impar. Because this could be considered more arches out the sides. So as we get back into our arches, we're still going to have those two different parts of our visceral arch number 1 to either side. The one that's closer to that telencephalon and diencephalon tissue is going to be that maxillary process. And then right behind that, we're going to have that mandibular process to visceral arch number 1. We can still see our hyoid arch hanging out too. Both the hyoid arch and mandibular arch are not typically going to have this kind of aortic arch hanging out in between. They should pretty much be separated into smaller arches at this point, or smaller arteries. But this one's kind of undeveloped in the arches, this pig that we're sectioning right now. If we go farther towards our tail and our pig, we can see visceral arch number 3 pop out all of a sudden. And we can even follow that aortic arch inside it to our heart region, and it will open up there, and it's basically falling through to the ventral aorta in that truncus arteriosus region of our heart. You might even see number 4, maybe this is number 4 right here, doing the same thing as number 3, but it's not really well defined anymore in the 10mm pig. We still can't really see the 6th aortic arch either. Excuse me. Here's number 4 following in. Let's see if I can do it. I'll talk about the 6th visceral arch when we get to your slides, just because I don't like these pictures. One last thing about your visceral arches, since we're not going to talk about the heart today. As always, you're going to have that darkly staining thyroid hanging out in the middle. It's kind of flat looking now on our 10mm pig. So if you're pointing out, make sure your pointer's on the darkly staining tissue and not that hole. And then the last thing to talk about today is our last kind of section of brain, our telencephalon tissue. It's going to have those telencephalic vesicles pretty clear in it now. You'll also see internal nares hanging out by that telencephalon tissue. And as you cut lower down on your embryo, you should see them open up into that outside world and become external nares with that olfactory pit, with that olfactory plateau that has invaginated to create the pit. But this should all pretty much be reviewed for you guys. Hopefully nothing's too stressful at this point. For the exam, make sure you know your nerves for both your chick and your pig. Make sure you can find them on your slides. Don't be wasting time trying to find them, especially if you have like a hard ID, like the 3rd nerve where it's really lightly staining. Just get familiar with your slides in case we have a bunch of missed questions on your exam. I don't. Okay. So does anyone have questions on the digital lab manual stuff? probably spinal cord, myelencephalon region in the back. This first slide, you can tell, is already further down the head than what you guys are used to seeing. That's the first presentation slide, but don't let that kind of throw you off. Again, dorsal isthmus, nothing too new here. Again, everything here is pretty much the same. Mesencephalon, spinal cord, dorsal isthmus, that nice thick tissue. Our metencephalon being really darkly staining. Remember your brain layers. You're going to have that lightly staining marginal layer along that outside. Then you're going to have that mantle layer being nice and darkly staining, very thick in the middle. And then, of course, our last and really thin layer is going to be that epidermal layer that creates our spinal fluid and brain fluids. And it's just going to be that one cell layer thick that you guys are so familiar with. So again, here we have our really round or ace of spades looking mesencephalon, or darkly staining metencephalon. You can see pretty clear spinal cord at this point, and you can also see that cranial nerve number 11 that was new for today. Remember, it's always going to be really interior. This bottom one, I think that's right. There's one right here. You can tell it's 11 usually because it's not piecey looking. It's not kind of broken up. It always has like one continuous band to it. So that's one really good identifier for the 11th as compared to the 12th. And you'll see what I mean when we get to the 12th one in a second. Alright, so here again, nothing new. We started to cut into that first endolymphatic duct. You can still see a little bit of number 11 right here. And we can also probably say maybe some spinal ganglia right there, but not really too sure at this point. Alright. Again, cutting back, seeing more of our otic vesicle right here. Let's see. Okay. Still see endolymphatic duct hanging out on the top. And then of course, cranial nerve number 10 is kind of popped up around here. Number 9 should be somewhere in there as well, but we may not see it just somehow if Dr. can take out these slides for today. So here we can now see cranial nerve number 12. You can see how it's kind of multiple round little structures looking like in there compared to 11. It's not going to be one smooth nerve or like number 11 was. It's also going to be closer to a really definitive spinal cord region, and that's another way to ID 12. Okay. Again, we have our lovely cranial nerve number 10, probably with that nice darkly staining jugular ganglion right here, compared to this lighter staining nerve tissue. You can definitely say we have some dorsal root ganglia now by our spinal cord. And of course, we still have our otic vesicles and the lymphatic duct not connected yet. Alright, so finally, cranial nerve number 9 has popped up around our otic vesicles. Number 10 still hanging out right there with that jugular ganglia, really darkly staining. You can see some of those semicircular canals kind of forming in this otic vesicle. Nothing too exciting. Okay. Again, still have cranial nerve number 9, number 10, number 9, number 10 on both sides. Still have those spinal root ganglia hanging out by the spinal cord. Okay. And then one last thing to point out on this slide, you can see our anterior cardinal veins hanging out, not connected to the heart yet, or our arteries. Okay. So this slide's a little bit more interesting. We're probably in that diencephalon tissue because we have that infundibulum probably hanging out right here. Maybe the start of Ratke's pouch right there, a little blob. Not really sure, not really well defined in this slide. We can see our Gasserian or semilunar ganglia, really darkly staining, quite large. We can see a little bit of our tuberculum infar. This one isn't as well really clearly. We can see an optic stalk going out to connect our lovely eyes to our brain. We can see stomodium or pharynx region right here. Kind of the start of our arches as well. Again, some heart is hanging out right here, probably atria with that truncus arteriosus sitting on top. Right here is probably your esophagus. Again, because of that flexure, we can see two different parts with that pharyngeal region and that esophagus, just cutting through it twice. We have our anterior cardinal veins to either side of our esophageal region. We have our lovely dorsal root, dorsal aortic roots sitting by them as well. And then one other thing Dr. Kemp may want you to know, just for knowing, autonomic chain ganglia is this really darkly staining tissue right here. So,
What's it called?
autonomic chain ganglia. Does anyone have questions about that slide?
Can you point to the
This really darkly staining tissue right here. On either side. Alright, so still probably in a little bit of diencephalon. We can see a little bit of an optic cup right here, but we're probably cutting also into some telencephalon tissue and has those two rounded bulbs to it with those vesicles forming from that tissue. Still cutting into a little bit of our visceral arches right here. And of course, we're still cutting back into our pretty well-formed heart at this point. The heart is going to have a complete pericardial cavity at this stage in the pig. So if you're asked to point that out, just pick someplace. But it does have that at this point. In this slide, this lovely little structure right here is going to be your pulmonary artery. And if you remember from class, that pulmonary artery forms from that sixth visceral arch. So make sure you can find this on your slides. It'd be a really good, tough ID, but Dr. Kemp seems to like it. Okay, so your trachea is hanging out right here. It's pretty small compared to your esophagus. And then you have your anterior cardinal veins, they moved a little bit, and then of course your dorsal aortic roots on top. And then the next slide, I'm just pointing out that pulmonary artery again, pretty close to that heart, but also close to the trachea and esophagus. Are there any questions about this stuff so far? I don't want to go into the next slides because I want to save everything on the heart for next Thursday. So there's no questions. And you guys can go today.
studying ecology. Stop it.